Laurence Goodman, developer, councillor, chairman of the board. You've had a very interesting life. How did it all start?
In London. I was born in London, in the East End of London, within the sound of Bow Bells. My parents were first generation British. Our family had come from Poland and practically walked across Europe, as many did in those days. And it was an interesting start.
What do you remember most about your childhood?
I remember not being able to tell the difference between my actual aunts and uncles and the courtesy aunts and uncles. Everybody lived very close together, and big families, and we didn't have much, but we had a good time. We weren't short of anything that was important.
Well, what was your family lifestyle like?
We lived week to week. My grandfather was a musician who'd become a pianist for the silent films in order to make a living. My father came from a huge family, and they had what they earned. It was a good incentive to get on there.
Well, what do you remember most about your childhood?
Well, I remember some bomb dropping. I remember hiding from the bombs and going into air raid shelters, and a lot of interesting things, rationing. Did
your childhood have a big influence on your later years as an adult?
A huge influence. Whilst I appreciated the family, the close-knit family, I wanted something a lot better than that. That influenced me to work hard and influenced me to get on.
So what were the biggest obstacles that you had to overcome as a child growing into an adult?
Oh, I don't think there are any real obstacles, except perhaps for myself. I did many things that seemed okay at the time, but I'm probably running before I could walk.
Now, you started out as a hairdresser.
That's right, absolutely right. My brother was a hairdresser, a successful hairdresser, and he earned quite a lot of money, so that seemed like a good idea. I trained as a hairdresser together with Vidal Sassoon, so I was in good company there. And fairly soon I wanted to have my own business, and hit all the obstacles of people who had nothing and were trying to raise money to run a business, and eventually built a building that I could, because I couldn't lease one. I built a building that was my first home on the top and a hairdressing salon below in a suburb of London, Chingford in Essex actually, and I was Laurence London. But I enjoyed the experience of building the building more than I did the hairdressing, so I sold that business and moved on, went into real estate.
So what sort of real estate was that?
It was local suburban real estate in a suburb not too far away, Gants Hill in Essex. And we started an office, myself and another investor partner. $1,500 we invested together each in a business, and we found an experienced real estate agent, named the business after him. It was very successful. In 3 years we had 3 offices, and we're doing quite well, but it still wasn't what I wanted to do.
Well, what did you want to do?
Well, I wanted to be more on the investment side rather than selling houses, so I sold my interest in that business and went and worked for a very large investment company, PG Property Corporation, and succeeded greatly there and enjoyed it much more.
So what was your job there?
Well, I was part of a 30-man sales team initially. My boss, not the owner of the company, but the manager, took me under his wing. I remember him, a huge man, an American, Philip Berger, and promised me the world if I could work hard and help him in some major projects. And I did, and he kept his word. And after a period of time, there were 15 salesmen and I was the sales manager.
Well, from that position, you moved into the London Barbican, is that right?
That's right. I worked for the Corporation of London. They were completing the Barbican development, which was huge, 2,200 homes and a lot of other buildings on a 40-acre site right in the heart of the city, the Square Mile, the Golden Mile. I applied for a job there and surprisingly, given my limited experience, got it.
Well, of course, you learnt a lot there.
I learnt a lot about how cities run and about all of the mechanisations of local government. But more than that, I met some really interesting people For example, I met a chap called Cyril Blawston, who was a giant in the real estate industry, a councillor in the Corporation of London. And he spoke to me in the early days at Barbican and said, you have a 2-year contract, and when you've completed that, I've got another task for you. And he offered me an opportunity in his real estate company, a major task to build the agency, with the major reward of being a 25% partnership in a very significant London real estate agency. And that followed in sequence. I went on, I took his offer, I succeeded, and I became a junior partner in a big London company. Just opposite Claridge's in Brook Street, very glamour spot.
Well, you obviously had a big reputation in London. What brought you to Perth?
I met Alan Bond in the late 60s, and we were introduced by a mutual contact, and he asked me to be London agent for Bond Corporation, selling their properties from London but all over the world. And 2 or 3 years later he asked me to come and do the same thing but based in Perth, working for Bond Corporation. And there was a time in my life when I was interested in doing new things, and I accepted.
In fact, you have an interesting, wonderful anecdote about your first day here in Perth.
I remember that, Russell. I arrived, and with their usual style, they gave me a wonderful office with a view across the river, just in front of Government House, looking across the Government House gardens and all the beautiful Swan River. And I insisted on putting my desk with my back to the river and facing the rear of the building. And they all couldn't understand that. And I explained to them that looking out of the back of that building in St George's Terrace, I could see the whole of east and the northern parts of Perth, and there wasn't a significant building to be seen for miles. And I thought that was the opportunity of Perth, and it's proved to be that in latter years.
Well, how did it prove to be an opportunity for you?
Well, for me, because I was always interested, given my background and my love of living in cities and love of the hustle bustle in cities and the history of cities, interaction of people, I could see that Perth was short of people. That Perth was a beautiful city that needed people, and so I committed myself to working towards growing the city and growing it by having more people live there. And so those opportunities which appeared in that area were the ones that were obvious to take, as well as other urban infill opportunities around the city.
Well, one opportunity was with Joseph Charles Learmonth Duffy.
After 5 years with Bond, exciting years, lots of travel, lots of glamour, but difficult to live a normal life, I decided to move on, and I went to work for Perpetual Trustees. Perpetual Trustees had a property company, a real estate agency, and had bought others. And they wanted somebody to pull that together. And I remember another famous name in Perth, Sid Corser, called me and asked me if I'd apply for that job. And I did, and I went to work for them. Subsequently, they amalgamated with Joseph Charles Learmonth Duffy. And later on, still in the early 80s, by this time, I had bought that company.
Well, you not only had a company life in those days. When I first met you, you were a Perth City Councillor. How did that come about?
Well, it first came about because somebody asked me to run, and I guess I was flattered. I hadn't thought about it before. And I ran, and I was in the council that followed on the reconstruction of the city of Perth in 1995. And I was there through 2 terms. And that gave me an opportunity to influence some of the things that were close to me and to work in the building of this population of the city of Perth, and we're seeing how hugely that's grown since that time.
Back in 1996, you appeared on the first episode of the real estate program. You actually had some very futuristic ideas. Have they come true?
They've all come true. And they weren't so futuristic, because there was enough evidence around the world of what makes cities work. We just didn't know much about it in Perth. So in a way, I was applying what I'd seen and what others had done successfully in other places and others had written about. And there were a huge number of forward-looking people who became my mentors. in Perth, well-known people.
Well, tell us about Perth in the 80s and 90s.
I guess it was probably like Los Angeles 50 years earlier. It was a bit of a cowboy town or a gold rush town, but there was huge potential.
Well, you certainly played a key role in the rejuvenation of Perth. What makes a great city?
People. Without people, no city actually works, and the more we focus on city, you can't have shops unless you've got people to spend their money there. You can't use any of the amenities. Nobody wants to come to a place without people, and people from all walks of life, every level. For every restaurateur, there's a dozen people who run the place, clean the place, cook and serve and do everything else in it. It takes people at every level to participate in a city for it to work.
And where to from here for Laurence Goodman?
It's a good question. I don't like to think of the ultimate place that I'll be, but I've still got work to do, and I've still got interest in and around the city, and I don't know whether I should be so pleased to say my ideas haven't changed all that much in years. It's not very innovative, but they work, and I enjoy the atmosphere in the city. I live in the city, and I think there's still a long way to go. And so for me, I think is doing less of the things that everybody has to do every day and more of the things I enjoy doing, and perhaps some more holidays with my wife and family, and enjoying whatever we've achieved over these last 35 or nearly 40 years in Perth.
Laurence Goodman, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Russell.